You know, when you picture the spark of the American Revolution, what comes to mind?
Usually the battlefield stuff.
Right, exactly. For most of us, it is this incredibly cinematic imagery, like muskets firing, bloody footprints in the snow, uh, guys in tricorn hats scream and charge across a battlefield.
Yeah, it feels like this inevitable violent eruption of liberty.
It really does. Like the heroes are all on exactly the same page, marching in perfect lockstep toward this predetermined freedom.
Which is not quite how it happened.
Not at all, because if you really want to find the true spark of the revolution, you have to leave the battlefield entirely.
You really do.
You have to step into a tense, incredibly stuffy, wood-paneled room in 1774. Because that spark, it didn't come from a cannon.
No, it came from paperwork.
Exactly. Fierce, agonizing debate, political maneuvering, and just a whole lot of paperwork.
Which is arguably much more dramatic, I mean, when you realize the sheer scale of what was actually on the line.
And how closely it mirrored modern political gridlock, right?
Oh, totally.
So, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we have a really fascinating mission for you. We are diving deep into a comprehensive Wikipedia article on the First Continental Congress.
It's a great source.
It is. And our goal for you today is to strip away that mythology of the monolithic founding fathers.
Yeah, we need to get rid of that idea.
We are going to explore how a deeply fractured, highly anxious group of colonists accidentally laid the groundwork for an entirely new nation.
And they did it not with bullets, but through high-stakes economic negotiation.
Okay, let's unpack this.
So, to really understand the pressure inside that room, we have to set the scene accurately. It is September 5th, 1774.
Okay.
The delegates are gathering at Carpenter's Hall in Philadelphia. And the atmosphere they were walking into is, well, it's essentially one of a hostage crisis.
Wait, a hostage crisis? That feels, I don't know, a bit melodramatic, doesn't it?
I mean, it sounds like it, but
Weren't the colonists the ones who had just destroyed a massive amount of corporate property during the Boston Tea Party?
well, yes.
So, to the government in London, this probably just looked like a necessary police action, to enforce the law.
Right, and that is exactly how Parliament viewed it. But their reaction is what actually created the crisis.
How so?
The British government didn't just arrest the perpetrators. They passed what the colonists dubbed the Intolerable Acts.
The Intolerable Acts. Just the name is intense.
Yeah, and they were sweeping, deeply punitive measures, like the British Navy literally blockaded Boston Harbor.
Wow.
Yeah, just suffocating the city's economy completely.
Just cutting them off.
Exactly. And they revoked Massachusetts' colonial charter, severely restricting their democratic town meetings.
So they took away their right to govern themselves.
Right. So for the delegates traveling to Philadelphia, you have to understand, this wasn't some grand summit to invent a country.
It was a panic response.
It was a terrifying emergency response. They were looking at Massachusetts and realizing if the Crown can unilaterally crush them, they can do it to any of us.
Right. So it's a crisis management meeting basically driven by self-preservation.
Precisely.
And getting everyone into that room to manage this crisis, it immediately reveals just how divided the continent actually was.
Oh, deeply divided.
According to our source, there were 56 delegates who showed up, representing 12 of the 13 colonies.
And the very mechanism of how those 56 men even got there, it tells you how chaotic the political infrastructure was at the time.
Because there was no standard way of electing them.
Exactly. There was no standardized election at all. Some delegates were elected directly by the people.
Okay.
Some were chosen by their existing colonial legislatures, and others were appointed by local committees of correspondence.
And committees of correspondence, which, just for those who might need a quick refresher, were basically the colonists' underground communication network.
Yeah, shadow governments, essentially.
Right. They were set up to coordinate resistance because the official legislatures were often just being dissolved by royal governors.
Exactly. It was a totally ad hoc gathering. And once they arrived, they elected Peyton Randolph of Virginia as the president of the Congress on opening day.
But he didn't last long, right?
No, the stress of navigating these factions was just immense. Ill health actually forced Randolph to retire by late October.
Wow. The stress literally made him sick.
Yeah. And he was replaced by Henry Middleton of South Carolina. Plus, they had Charles Thompson, who was a prominent leader of the Philadelphia Committee of Correspondence, serving as the congressional secretary.
Right. But looking at the guest list, I mean, the most glaring detail isn't the leadership, it's the empty chair.
Yes, the missing colony.
Right, you mentioned 12 of the 13 colonies. Georgia is completely absent from Carpenter's Hall. Why?
Their absence is so deeply revealing about the complex geopolitical reality of the time.
Okay, tell me about that.
So at that specific moment in 1774, Loyalist sentiments in Georgia heavily outweighed Patriot views.
Really? They were mostly loyalists.
Yeah, but it wasn't just ideological. It's highly practical.
Yeah.
Georgia was the southernmost colony, right?
Right on the edge.
Exactly, bordering hostile territories. And they were incredibly dependent on British military protection against Native American uprisings.
Oh, I see.
Furthermore, their economy was just intimately tied to British trade.
So they literally couldn't afford to anger the crown. Without the British military, they were completely exposed.
Precisely, they didn't want to poke the bear.
Makes total sense.
Yeah, it wouldn't be until the following year, at the Second Continental Congress, that the situation had deteriorated enough for Georgia to finally send delegates.
That context changes everything. It's like this incredibly tense neighborhood watch meeting, right?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Where one house on the block, Massachusetts, is already boarded up by the authorities.
Right.
And another neighbor, Georgia, is just too nervous to even show up.
Exactly.
So we have these 56 guys from 12 colonies, and the text notes that the rules adopted by the delegates were specifically designed to, quote, guard the equality of participants and to promote free-flowing debate.
That was a goal, yes.
But given that they are in this pressure cooker and Boston is actively being starved out by a naval blockade, how chaotic did this room actually get?
It was the absolute opposite of a unified front.
Really?
Oh, yeah. As the deliberations progressed, it became painfully clear that the men in that room didn't even agree on why they were there in the first place.
Wow.
You had this massive ideological clash right out of the gate between two main factions, the conservatives and the radicals.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because we are taught from childhood that these guys all desperately wanted independence from day one.
Right, the whole action movie narrative.
Exactly. But let's look at the conservatives for a second. These are brilliant, highly influential figures.
Oh, absolutely.
You've got Joseph Galloway and John Dickinson from Pennsylvania,
Right.
John Jay from New York, Edward Rutledge from South Carolina. And their goal wasn't a revolution at all.
Not even slightly. Their goal was reconciliation.
Reconciliation.
Yeah. They wanted to return to the way things were before the intolerable acts.
So they were actively trying to hit the brakes.
Exactly. They believed their task was to forge careful policies that would apply just enough diplomatic and economic pressure on Parliament to rescind the unreasonable laws.
Okay, so a very measured response.
Very measured. They viewed themselves as British subjects trying to fix a broken administrative relationship, not as architects of a new republic.
They were the negotiators trying to save the marriage.
That's a great analogy, yeah.
But across the aisle, you had the radicals, who were just entirely done with couples counseling.
Oh, they were out the door.
Right. And this group included Patrick Henry of Virginia, Roger Sherman of Connecticut, and of course the Massachusetts duo, Samuel Adams and John Adams.
Right, and their rhetoric was just intense. I mean, it was borderline treasonous to British ears. Their ultimate goal wasn't some polite compromise.
What did they want?
It was a decisive, undeniable statement of the rights and liberties of the colonies.
Right. In fact, our source points out that Roger Sherman outright denied the legislative authority of Parliament entirely.
He really did.
He basically stood up and said, London has absolutely zero jurisdiction over our internal affairs.
Which is a huge escalation.
And Patrick Henry went even further. He argued that because of British overreach, the existing colonial governments were already effectively dissolved.
Right, the state of nature argument.
Yeah, he believed they had been thrust back into a state of nature and that the Congress needed to develop a completely new independent system of government from scratch.
You can just imagine the conservatives hearing Patrick Henry say that and just breaking out in a cold sweat.
Because it's practically a declaration of war.
Exactly. A statement like that was an invitation for a British invasion.
Right.
So you have these two extreme ends of the spectrum, and this tension comes to a head through two competing plans of action.
Okay, what were the plans?
Well, the Congress's first major move was actually a massive victory for the radicals. They adopted something called the Suffolk Resolves.
The Suffolk Resolves. And this was a measure drawn up by several counties in Massachusetts, right?
Yes, and it was incredibly aggressive.
Wait, I remember reading this. It included a stark declaration of grievances. It called for a strict trade boycott of British goods.
And this is the really alarming part.
Yeah, it urged each colony to start setting up and training its own independent militia.
Right. It was essentially a continent-wide preparation for armed conflict.
Just escalating things instantly.
Exactly. So, in immediate response to that radical escalation, the lead conservative, Joseph Galloway of Pennsylvania, he realizes he has to pull the room back from the brink of war.
He has to put out the fire.
Yeah. So he steps up and proposes his plan of union.
Okay, and how did Galloway's plan actually work? Like, what was the mechanism for his compromise?
It was actually a very sophisticated power-sharing agreement. Galloway suggested creating a formal American legislative body, a Grand Council.
Okay, a Grand Council.
Yeah, elected by the colonial legislatures. And this council would act alongside a president general appointed directly by the king.
So still keeping the royal connection.
Exactly. The brilliance of the plan was a mutual veto.
A mutual veto.
Yeah. Parliament could propose policies for the empire, but this new American Grand Council would have to consent to any measures affecting the colonies, and vice versa.
Wow.
It was a true union of Great Britain and the colonies.
That is, I mean, it's essentially offering the colonies a massive promotion within the British Empire.
It really is.
They stay British, they keep the protection of the Navy, but they get a real institutionalized voice.
Right.
But if Galloway is proposing this completely reasonable, functional middle ground, the radicals must have been terrified.
Oh, they were panicking.
Because a workable compromise like that would completely kill their momentum for deeper autonomy. So how did the radicals kill the bill?
What's fascinating here is how effectively and really ruthlessly the radical wing silenced this middle ground.
What did they do?
Well, Galloway's plan was hotly debated, and it actually has significant support in the room.
Because people wanted a peaceful way out.
Right. But ultimately, the radical faction managed to table the measure by a very narrow margin.
Okay, they tabled it.
And then they went a step further. They didn't just vote it down.
Or they do.
They literally struck it from the official record of their proceedings.
They erased it.
Completely erased it.
They scrubbed the minutes, so history, and more importantly, the king wouldn't even see that a diplomatic compromise was ever on the table.
Exactly.
That is a brutal piece of political maneuvering.
It's intense, right? It shows you how desperately the radicals wanted to project a unified, uncompromising front to London.
They couldn't afford to look weak.
Right. They understood that if the British government saw a divided Congress, Parliament would just exploit those divisions.
Of course they would.
So the unity was politically necessary, even if it had to be completely manufactured by erasing the dissenting opinions of men like Galloway and John Jay.
Wow. So Galloway's political compromise fails, and it's wiped from the record? But the delegates still have a massive problem. They are still sitting in Carpenter's Hall, the British Navy is still starving Boston, and they need a way to fight back that both the radicals and the conservatives can actually stomach.
Right, because they are stuck.
The conservatives won't accept war, and the radicals won't accept submission. What is the lever they can actually pull?
Well, the only lever left was the economy.
The economy.
Yeah, they pivot entirely from political warfare to economic warfare.
Okay.
The voices of compromise did ultimately carry the day, just not with a new government structure. Instead, the First Continental Congress passed what was called the Declaration and Resolves.
And what was the core of that?
The absolute centerpiece of this document was the creation of the Continental Association.
Okay, the Continental Association. It sounds like a bank, honestly.
It does, yeah.
But it was essentially a pact to hit Great Britain right in the wallet.
Exactly.
They agreed to a massive coordinated boycott of British goods, which was scheduled to take effect on December 1st, 1774.
And you have to realize it was a monumental logistical undertaking.
I can imagine.
Think about the infrastructure of the 18th century. They are attempting to unite 12 disparate, fiercely independent colonial economies under a single airtight trade policy without modern communication.
Just a massive group project via horseback.
Basically. And to satisfy the conservatives, while they were setting up this aggressive embargo, they tried one last diplomatic plea.
The petition to the king, right?
Right. They drafted a formal petition pleading for a redress of their grievances and the repeal of the intolerable acts.
It's a classic carrot and stick approach.
Exactly.
Like, please, Your Majesty, listen to reason, but just in case Parliament doesn't, we are cutting off your cash flow.
Right.
It's basically the ultimate continent-wide consumer strike. Now, I really want to dig into the mechanics of this boycott because there is a detail in this economic plan that is frankly astounding.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
It completely stopped me in my tracks when I read the source material.
You're referring to the clause regarding the transatlantic slave trade.
Yes. The text explicitly states that after Congress signed the agreement embracing non-exportation and non-importation of British goods, they also planned the non-importation of slaves beginning December 1st.
Right, and this raises such an important question about the intersection of economics, leverage, and morality during this period.
It's huge.
By agreeing to halt the importation of enslaved people, they were taking a step that would have effectively abolished the transatlantic slave trade into the United States 33 years before it actually legally ended in 1808.
33 years. That is a massive historical what if.
It really is.
If that policy had held, the entire trajectory of American history, the unimaginable human suffering that occurred over those next 3 decades, the sheer demographic makeup of the country, it all looks completely different.
Completely different.
But how did this actually pass? Like, how did the southern colonies, whose economies were entirely built on forced labor, agree to halt the very trade that sustained their plantations?
It's a profound detail, but we have to look at the mechanism of why it was included.
Okay.
For many delegates, particularly from the South, this wasn't a sudden moral awakening
Right.
or a purely humanitarian crusade. It was utilized strictly as an economic weapon.
How so?
Well, the British Empire's transatlantic slave trade was highly lucrative for British merchants and shipowners.
Okay, so it was a major cash cow for London.
Exactly. By halting the importation, the colonists were deliberately disrupting their own labor supply chains, specifically to inflict maximum financial pain on London's shipping elite.
Wow. So they were willing to fundamentally shock their own agricultural labor economics just to prove to Parliament that they controlled the continent's purse strings.
That's exactly it.
And they didn't just stop at their own borders either, did they?
No, they didn't.
The source notes, they looked at Great Britain's other lucrative colonies down in the West Indies and essentially blackmailed them.
They did. The Congress explicitly threatened the West Indies with a total boycott of their goods, unless the West Indian colonies also agreed to the non-importation of British goods.
That is wild. It's like trying to enforce a modern decentralized blockade,
Right.
like cutting Britain off from the 18th century equivalent of the SWIFT banking network.
That's a great comparison. They were trying to build a completely airtight economic wall across the entire Atlantic.
Trying to starve the British manufacturing sector into submission.
Yes, hoping the merchants in London would scream so loudly that Parliament would be forced to repeal the Intolerable Acts.
Right.
So the Congress officially adjourns on October 26, 1774. They pack up, they leave Carpenter's Hall having laid this massive economic trap.
Right. They did the paperwork.
Yeah.
But paperwork is just parchment until people actually change their behavior.
Exactly.
And we know how hard it is to get people to change their purchasing habits today. So
Yeah.
did this incredibly ambitious continent-wide consumer strike actually work on the ground?
It was a staggering success. The numbers are almost hard to comprehend. According to our source, imports from Britain dropped by 97% in 1775 compared with the previous year.
Wait, 97%?
97%.
I just need to linger on that number. That is not a boycott. That is a total economic blackout.
It's unheard of.
Trying to get 97% of people today to voluntarily agree on what color the sky is, let alone completely change their daily consumption habits and sacrifice essential goods, is impossible.
Right.
Which tells me this couldn't have been entirely voluntary. How on earth did they enforce a 97% drop in trade across thousands of miles of coastline?
It required an astonishing level of discipline and, more importantly, rigorous local enforcement.
Okay, how did they enforce it?
To achieve that 97% drop, the Continental Association mandated the creation of local enforcement bodies. Furthermore, the political buy-in was massive. The Houses of Assembly of every single participating colony officially approved the proceedings of the Congress.
Every single one.
Well, with one notable exception, New York.
Always have to be a little different, New York.
Yeah, exactly.
But even with New York's official legislative hesitation, the overarching 97% drop tells us the merchants and the people on the ground were heavily committing to this.
Or at least being forced to comply.
Right. And Congress didn't just plan a boycott, they built in an escalation clause, too.
Yes, they did. The non-importation of British goods was only step one.
What was step 2?
They agreed that if the Intolerable Acts were not repealed, they would turn the screws tighter. They planned to cease all exports back to Britain after September 10th, 1775.
Oh, wow. So they were slowly turning off the tap of raw materials that fueled the British Empire.
Exactly.
And they also knew this wasn't going to be a one-and-done meeting.
Right, they planned ahead.
They voted to meet again the following year if their grievances weren't addressed by the king. And in anticipation of that second Congress, they decided to expand the guest list.
Yes, they wanted to make this economic wall even bigger.
So they sent letters of invitation to the colonies that hadn't joined them in Philadelphia.
And looking at that specific list of invitations is a fascinating glimpse into the geography of the British Empire at the time.
Who did they invite?
Well, they reached out to Quebec, St. John's Island, which we now know as Prince Edward Island, Nova Scotia, Georgia, and both East Florida and West Florida.
Wow. Just pause and imagine that alternate map for a second.
It's wild to think about.
Imagine if East and West Florida, or Quebec and Nova Scotia, had actually RSVP'd, yes, and sent delegates to join the resistance.
Yeah,
The borders of North America would look fundamentally different today.
entirely different.
It wouldn't just be the original 13 colonies. It would be this massive, sprawling continental alliance stretching from the Arctic tundra all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico.
It's one of the great alternate histories.
Hmm.
But, the reality of colonial politics meant that of all those far-flung invitations sent out, only Georgia would ultimately answer the call and send delegates to the Second Continental Congress.
Right. So we have this wildly successful 97% boycott. The colonists have proven, against all odds, that they can unite and inflict real, measurable financial pain on the most powerful empire on Earth.
They absolutely proved that.
The strategy is working exactly as the conservatives like Joseph Galloway hoped. The economic lever is pulled.
It is.
But it didn't save the relationship with Great Britain. Why did this brilliant plan fail to prevent the war?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we see the profound, tragic irony of the First Continental Congress.
What's the irony?
They were highly successful in organizing the colonies economically.
Yeah.
The boycott was functioning perfectly.
Yeah.
But events on the ground simply outpaced their diplomatic timeline.
The paperwork, no matter how effective, just couldn't move fast enough.
Exactly. The potential of that 97% drop in trade to actually alter British colonial policy in Parliament was completely short-circuited by physical reality.
Because the fighting started.
Yes. In April of 1775, long before the economic pain could force a political surrender from the politicians in London, the outbreak of armed hostilities occurred.
Right.
The British marched on Lexington and Concord to seize colonial gunpowder. Shooting started.
And the cinematic imagery we talked about at the very beginning finally catches up to the history.
Exactly.
The muskets fire and the era of strategic boycotts and polite petitions to the king is instantly replaced by the chaos of the American Revolutionary War.
Which completely forced the hands of the delegates.
Right, because when they convened the Second Continental Congress the following May, it was under vastly different circumstances.
Completely different. They were no longer managing a trade dispute or debating Galloway's power-sharing plans.
No.
They were tasked with organizing the active military defense of the colonies.
It is such a wild journey from a stuffy room in Philadelphia to a continent at war.
It really is.
Looking back at everything we've pulled from this Wikipedia article on the First Continental Congress, how do you synthesize all of this for the listener? Like, what is the core takeaway from what actually happened inside Carpenter's Hall?
Well, the foundation of the American response to British tyranny wasn't initially a unified, glorious call to arms.
Right.
It was a masterclass in collective economic leverage. What the First Continental Congress proves is that people with wildly different end goals, whether it was Joseph Galloway desperately wanting to remain a loyal British subject, or Patrick Henry demanding a completely new independent system, could still unite around a highly effective singular action.
Yeah, they figured out one thing they could do together.
Exactly. They argued bitterly, they erased compromises from the official record, they threatened their neighbors in the West Indies, but ultimately, they orchestrated a 97% drop in imperial trade.
Which is incredible.
It shows the incredible power of economic organization as the necessary precursor to political revolution.
It really does reframe everything. The revolution wasn't just destiny, it was strategy, and it was fraught with intense disagreement every single step of the way.
Exactly.
But as we wrap up this deep dive, there is one specific detail from the source material that I want you, the listener, to keep turning over in your mind.
Oh, this is a good one.
We talked about how wildly successful the boycott was, 97%. And we asked how they achieved that impossible number.
Right.
Well, the text mentions the exact mechanism. It says, quote, committees of observation and inspection were to be formed in each colony to ensure compliance with the boycott.
Think about that.
Yeah, think about what that actually looked like on the ground in your neighborhood. What happens to the daily fabric of a community when your everyday neighbors are suddenly empowered by a distant Congress to legally inspect your home?
To poke through your things.
Exactly. To monitor what kind of tea you drink, to judge your political loyalty and your morality based entirely on your shopping habits.
It changes everything about daily life.
It really does. The spark of the revolution might have happened in that tense, wood-paneled room in Philadelphia, but the fire was maintained by ordinary people peering into each other's pantry windows.
Wow.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the history you think you know. We'll catch you next time.